Pulsar Studio.
Video games are the youngest artistic medium, and since their emergence, they have developed ingenious tools to create experiences, but this must be in alignment with a vision. This is Checkpoint, and today we're going to discover an example of it. The origin of video games has promoted the use of different technological resources as tools to create works and express ideas. One of the most known examples of this is procedural generation or creation. This is the creation of content using an algorithm programmed in the code and which is executed by the game itself while the program is running, instead of the manual creation and previous distribution of the content by the developers themselves. The origin of the procedural generation in video games comes even before the digital age, because where there is some type of development or generation of gameplay based on randomness following a framework of rules, there is procedural generation. The most concrete example of this is the role-playing game par excellence, Dungeons & Dragons, where the game masters had to rely on randomness to create certain scenarios and enemies, avoiding falling into creative or repetitive blockage that ruin the experience for the players. Procedural generation can cover many aspects, from objects, textures, elements or systems of a game, to even the full development of experiences. In the early days of the industry, this technique was used mainly to optimize resources due to the technical limitation in processing capacity and memory, although, not long after, it began to be used as a design resource with which specific experiences were created. The scope and possibility that this tool provides is difficult to quantify, since with technological development, this resource gave way to the virtual infinite possibility of content creation. With the development of this technique, different purposes have emerged in its use, among which are some such as content scalability, creation of perpetual experiences with inexhaustible content, unlimited replayability, creative assistance for developers, creation of unique and adjustable experiences for each player, and freshness from a constant novelty. These uses and purposes are not mutually exclusive and can be generated in combination within the same experience. There are many examples of games that use one or more of these purposes as an element of their design, and there are even those that base their entire experience on their use. The first games that sought to replicate the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing style experience in a digital context are dungeon crawler games and the rogue genre. In these games, the vision is to create a role-playing experience using stats and levels to explore dungeons packed with enemies and treasures. But a very important element to create the role-playing experience is the freshness and novelty in each adventure, for which it is necessary to have a new level design in each journey. It is impossible to create an infinite number of scenarios manually, and that is where the use of procedural generation comes in. Through the years, new experiences have been developed from the same idea, in games that are not even based on the role-playing element and that use different genres such as platforms, but where the constant creation of unique levels is a fundamental part for both the gameplay and the narrative. Because the mastery of the mechanics is the basis of the experience, and the way to keep it alive is with constant freshness and novelty. A great example of this is the game Spelunky. Using procedural generation helps to give a unique touch to the experience and enhance the essential concept of the vision. Even in first-person shooter games where the narrative, the use of comedy, and the fluidity of the experience are enhanced thanks to the procedural generation of objects that are part of the gameplay. In Borderlands, procedural weapon creation that combines aesthetic designs, parameters, stats, effects, feel, and even mechanics create a unique experience by empowering all the other elements from this resource. One of the reasons why Minecraft became the cultural phenomenon that is today is thanks to the use of procedural generation of infinite worlds with different elements, resources, and distribution, which allow creating an experience where the limit is the imagination of the users. It is even possible to create a new game mechanic, which also allows the creation of an almost inexhaustible narrative, as does the Nemesis system of Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, where the use of an algorithm with variables such as personality, strengths, weaknesses, and power, they allow to create an infinite number of unique orcs, that each one can live a small personal story with the protagonist, being this possible during the whole experience. This tool also can be used to adjust the player's experience by analyzing and interpreting their behavior in the game, using that information to modify level design, enemy behavior, and item availability, as Left 4 Dead does with its artificial intelligence director. However, the possibilities provided by this tool carry a significant risk. The creation of experiences does not arise from an infinite availability of resources, but from the meticulous design of the world and the interaction of the elements that make it up, following a creative vision. Using procedural content generates experiences that must fit with the other elements of the overall experience design. When the implementation of this resource is not fully aligned with the experience sought in the vision, a dissonance can be generated with negative effects. An example of this is the use of procedural level generation in the indie game created by Gabe Cusillo and published by Devolver Digital in 2019, Ape Out. This is a wonderful work in many ways, which exemplifies the value of the industry as an artistic medium, because being a project worked mostly by a single person, it achieves very impressive results. The game is a top-down beat-em-up that expresses various concepts in the same experience. One of the best achieved results comes by designing the pace and feel guided by a song. Smooth gameplay that uses stealth and improvisational mechanics, where hitting is as important as holding and throwing, and the rhythmic direction of jazz drums serves as a guide to hold all the pieces together. The player controls an ape who tries to escape from a laboratory, for which he must go through corridors and stages full of guards who are hunting him. The musical creative guide gave shape and style to the aesthetic design in which the world, objects, and creatures are represented like a painting on the covered art of a jazz record. The gameplay is infused with the art style, making it feel like jazz is being painted when playing it. However, its creator wanted to include an element of replayability and novelty that will generate the sensation of improvisation in the actions, using procedural generation in the design of levels as means to achieve this. Cusillo's idea is that the novelty that procedural generation brings to the level design would result in an improvisational experience in the player's escape. However, the use of procedurally generated content does not generate novelty by itself, because this element interacts with more elements, and in this interaction, different results can be obtained. Not all the scenarios created by the algorithm collude with the gameplay created by the vision, generating impossible levels to pass and having to die to obtain a different design. The experience of improvising is based on the idea that the player must die and retry the levels, but all elements of the gameplay go to the idea of escaping, not dying. Improvisation creates a satisfying experience when, by using it, reaches an objective or achievement, in this case progress and escape. But the procedural generation of levels and the rules of progression result in improvisation being in the act of dying and restarting the level. That is, the novelty comes in failing and not in succeeding. But once one fails, improvisation stops generating satisfaction to give way to frustration from having to repeat the same but different level many times without being able to progress. Each failed attempt weighs more in the player's consideration than all the previous successful attempts, because there can only be one successful attempt per level against multiple failures, focusing on the randomness of level generation and creating the feeling that to pass one level, one does not need skill, decision-making, or improvisation, but luck. And by human psychological trait, bad luck always feels more likely than good luck. There could be different alternatives to generate improvisation in the game without creating frustration or breaking the experience. Inspiration from roguelike games, where novelty and replayability are an important factor, explain the reason that led Cusillo to opt for this resource. However, there still seems to be some element missing that allows the gameplay based on the creative vision and improvisation experience to harmoniously come together, and perhaps the procedural generation is not the right one. Procedural generation is both a very powerful and effective technical as well as a design tool, but it is important that despite the benefits that its use may create, all possible consequences are also evaluated and whether any of them affect the idea behind the creative vision. All the tools and resources can only achieve what the design allows. By themselves, they cannot create the desired experiences, just as a keyboard cannot write lines of code without the mind and hands of a programmer. And you? What great examples of design achieved by procedural generation do you know? What kind of experience do you think will benefit the most from using this tool? Leave it in the comments below. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Checkpoint. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share this to keep discovering the art in making and designing video games. See you next time!